everybody, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new, then just welcome. In my last video, we talked about the commonly held beliefs and misconceptions about people with autism that cause harm to them. In this video, picking up where we left off there, I'm going to discuss some of the ways that our society puts them into practice. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone to please like my video, subscribe, and leave a comment. Any feedback is welcome. Let me know what you think, and let me know what videos you'd like to see me do in the future. All right, let's get started. Technically, it's illegal for an employer to fire or refuse to hire an employee or applicant under the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and Americans with Disabilities Act. But in spite of this, the unemployment and underemployment rate of people on the autism spectrum is estimated to be as high as 85%. The social stigma of autism has led a lot of people to believe that this is because people with autism just aren't capable of or don't know how to apply for jobs, answer questions in an interview, and or don't have the skills to perform well at a given job. But what it really is that neurotypical employers, just like the rest of the neurotypical community, are conditioned to see people with autism for the things that make them supposedly unhireable. For example, my stimming behavior or self-stimulatory behavior that I use to cope with overstimulation is that when my mind is too overwhelmed by outside stimuli for me to hear myself think, I vocalize under my breath, either very loudly or very quietly. After I graduated high school, I wanted very badly to be a counselor at a summer camp and study early childhood education in college. This camp counselor job required all employees to have 3 reference forms filled out and verified by Human Resources. To do this, I scoured my high school and university for the faculty members who I felt knew me the best and therefore were best able to vouch for me being able to do this job because they knew how responsible and hardworking I was and how good of an attitude I had. Unfortunately, after the forms had been faxed to HR, I found out that these people either all refused to fill out the form or filled out the form but basically told the camp not to put me in front of children because of my stimming behavior. If, like I said, I'm responsible, committed, hardworking, and show a lot of dedication to the facility and everyone there, then I feel that my stimming behavior should not be a deciding factor in whether or not I get that job or any job. And yet it was. The inadequate references they got meant that I could work there for 2 summers, but only in the dining hall kitchen, where in this job, it was for 7 weeks, and each week you'd get a different job. 1 week you'd work a cabin, 1 you'd work in the kitchen, 1 you'd lead nature hikes, 1 you'd be a lifeguard, so on and so forth. But washing dishes in the kitchen was the only one I was allowed to do because I didn't have 3 forms saying that I was capable of working with the children. It was the camp's rule, and my boss couldn't do anything about it, but I could tell that my boss was on the side of my reference providers. She raised concerns that if I were to be placed on the front lines with campers, they would be exposed to a stimming behavior that they'd find uncomfortable because they didn't understand because they weren't used to it. I felt that this concern was kind of a valid point, but I also thought that as long as my stimming behavior wouldn't affect my ability to watch over and take care of these campers, that shouldn't matter. But this employer and my reference providers assumed that my stimming meant I was too easily overwhelmed to be able to handle such a big responsibility. While it's true that for people with autism, it doesn't take as much sensory stimuli to overwhelm the brain as it does for neurotypicals, it doesn't make us any less capable of doing something, and it's very ableist to assume that it does. Following my 2nd summer and final summer working at this camp, I went back to college, determined to triumph over the terrible experience I just had at the camp and prove to my boss and reference providers that they were wrong and that I am very capable of properly working with children in a camp or classroom setting. Unfortunately, history repeated itself. The teacher I was assisting at one of my field placements, after a few sessions there, asked me not to come back because of my stimming, and when my university's education department heard about it, they pressured me to find a new major. While I did manage to find a major that I really like, creative writing, I'm honestly still not quite over having the major I was so intent on, that was my whole world and end goal for everything, pretty much ripped away from me against my will, all because I wasn't normal. If you heard these people's sides of the stories, you would be so sure that they did what they did because they were looking out for the kid. But as more time passes and I reflect on it more, I realize it was actually about denying me an opportunity to be visible to the people I serve because I have a disability, because I'm different. If they were to say up front,
"I'm kicking you out or telling you no because you have autism,"
I could probably report these people to someone and get them in trouble for disability discrimination. But the subtle systemic ableism present in our society allowed them to get around that by basically saying,
"It's not because of your autism, it's because of your stimming."
Which to me is like saying,
"It's not because you have epilepsy, it's because you have seizures."
The saddest part of all of this is, if the camp counselor job and teaching major had worked out, it might have been a step forward in the ongoing fight against this kind of systemic ableism against people with autism. My campers and students would be exposed to an adult leader with a disability, and it would show them that people like me exist and have the same right as anyone else to be visible in society and are just as capable as anyone of doing these things. But as is the point of this video essay, the ableism and social stigma still persist in the 21st century. And I'm just one part of a larger population that's fallen victim to this reality. A survey carried out in Wales found that only 16% of United Kingdom adults with autism were employed. Yet 77% of unemployed autistic adults said they wanted a job, but they couldn't find one because so many times they'd experienced hiring discrimination. Now let's go into the more extreme realm of anti-autistic ableism. In grade school, middle school, and high school, I was part of the 63% of autistic students who experienced bullying. The scariest thing about that was, because I was so literal and didn't always understand social cues, I often didn't even know that I was being bullied. Kids at school took note of the things I just mentioned and would sometimes tell a joke or ask a random question just so they could get a kick out of taking it seriously. This is very similar to how I found in my research that many autistic students find themselves in a situation where a kid at school is able to figure out what kinds of things can trigger meltdowns from them, and then that kid will trigger the autistic student on purpose so they can get a kick out of seeing the meltdown. When I was in middle school and high school, girls would get into their little cliquey groups and basically make all this lunchtime banter about how when I stimmed, I was growling at people. But the most vivid example of bullying I remember is how when I was in 4th grade, I sat for a long time on the bus next to a girl who poked pencil lead into my skin and pulled my hair every morning and afternoon on our way to and from school. And even having experienced all this, I'm still one of the lucky ones. A large percentage of the 63% figure I mentioned earlier have actually had their physical safety threatened by their bullies. And hate-based violence isn't just something kids on the autism spectrum experience. Figures show that adults with autism are 4 times more likely to be the victim of a violent hate crime than people whose disabilities affect their mobility, stamina, or vision. What's even worse is that there's a lot of victim blaming when it comes to these hate crimes. Oftentimes, the perpetrators of these crimes aren't held accountable on the grounds that the victim supposedly brought it upon themselves by making themselves vulnerable, which is ridiculous because these people didn't ask to have these disabilities that made them vulnerable. And in the case of an autism-based hate crime, the victim is usually blamed because of their social skills deficits or because they caused a scene with their meltdowns and or stimming behavior. Although I'm one of the lucky ones who's never experienced violence of a nature this extreme, the kinds of situations I just described remind me of when I was a kid and how when I would get teased or made fun of, I would be told to stop stimming or get better at my social skills so that stuff wouldn't happen to me. But what happens when I'm medically unable to do those things? And shouldn't we be teaching these kids, and in the real world these adults, that it's not okay to beat someone up or destroy their property or target them in any way just because they're different? So thank you so much for watching and listening to what I had to say. I hope that for many of you, I opened your eyes to a very real problem that even after hundreds of years is still not over. For more videos like this, where you can learn more about these social issues, please subscribe to my channel and have a great day.